get things moving pretty quickly today. We're going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to get right into a couple of how-to scenarios. We're going to show you how to automate the CMDB import of hardware and software from Jamf into ServiceNow. We're going to show you how to automate software delivery from your ServiceNow service portal to Macs that you have enrolled in Jamf. And we are going to demonstrate how you can automate the software reclamation of underutilized or blacklisted software titles. So my name is Jay Weigard. I'm the Director of Innovation here at ITS Partners. So I lead our product development team, and product development for us primarily means developing ServiceNow apps and integrations. Before leading product here at ITS Partners, I was a senior UI engineer at ServiceNow, and basically most of my career is in front-end development, UI design, user experience. So a lot of my focus is really on trying to bring the simplicity of the consumer app experience that we have on our phones to complex enterprise app solutions. I've also got in the room with me here, I've got my cat Shinji. He is a little vocal, and from time to time he may chime in with some interesting tidbits, but right now he is dozing on the cat tree, so I'm not really sure what his participation level is going to be. Just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that he is here. So let's get into that overview, and let's talk about just very quickly, like what is Jamf? Jamf is the enterprise standard for managing Apple devices. You can manage Mac OS, iOS, and tvOS devices. It's a great product. It's so great, in fact, that Apple uses it internally to manage their own devices. If I was describing it to another systems admin, I would just say that it's basically like SCCM for Macs. It functions as both the system of inventory and kind of a reporting data source. It also enables you to remotely deploy equipment and resources to end users, and you can remotely manage configuration of those those computers, those phones, etc., via policies and scripting. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with Jamf. This would be a long webcast if I went through all of it. Definitely check them out. Check out their product. Brings us to the ITS Jamf integration, which is a ServiceNow store integration developed in-house by my team here at ITS Partners. Because it is a ServiceNow store integration, that lets you know that it is, it's been certified and code reviewed by the ServiceNow certification team. They are, making sure that we adhere to best practices, and they kind of are enforcing two main dictates. One, that we do not adversely affect your ServiceNow instance performance, and two, that we do not adversely affect the security of your ServiceNow instance. And we obviously take those two concerns very, very seriously. We want our app to, help you and not cause you problems. And so that's kind of what that ServiceNow store certification helps to give you some assurance about. The integration does, I would say it satisfies two main stories. One is that it automates the CMDB import from Jamf to ServiceNow. It's done that since its initial release. And new in version 1.2, which we just released last week, you can now remotely manage those software assets with some automation. So you can do that now for your Macs. You can deploy software remotely from your service catalog, as I've mentioned, and you can also analyze software usage and reclaim licenses that aren't being used, or software that has been blacklisted from your environment and you don't want to see it in the CMDB. And so part of how we do that is with our software inventory policy and script. This is something exclusive that we developed. It helps us to overcome some roadblocks for software asset management on Macs. Basically, Macs don't have a kind of a dedicated property in the package indicating who the software publisher is. So you would get you would get a property indicating something like, the display name as Google, or I'm sorry, as Chrome.app. You would get a version of 73.1.1, but you wouldn't get a property indicating that the publisher is Google. And so our integration will, during the guided setup, it will deploy out a policy. And once per day, when your computers check into that policy, it will run a script which digs into their applications and sends some very detailed data back to the ServiceNow instance, where the integration can sift through that data and accurately figure out who the publisher is. As we'll see when we look at the demo data, that becomes really important for software asset management. You want to know who the publisher is so that you can accurately count those license allocations, do normalization, entitlements, all that software asset management stuff. You really need to know who the publisher is. And so we spent some extra time, making sure that the integration can accommodate that story. I personally would not feel comfortable, trying to sell you another tool today, knowing that income streams are, being disrupted all over the world, if I didn't think that this product actually can provide you value and help you, work through some of the current challenges. So as we all have to, support these much larger remote workforces, one thing is becoming clear to a lot of companies, and that's the fact that there is a max-sized gap in many of your enterprise IT processes. It's very difficult for IT to support what they don't know about or what they don't have good data on. And while they can certainly go out to the Jamf platform and get that data, and Jamf is great. It has a lot of great detailed data. It can let you do a lot of cool management functions on your Macs. But the Jamf platform isn't going to really have all of your processes, all your approval processes, your IT workflows, etc. So anytime your support team has to do kind of that swivel chair from ServiceNow over to Jamf, that Jamf activity is really happening more or less outside of your normal processes. So ServiceNow is a system of record for your IT and business processes. So really, you want that Jamf data and that Jamf functionality to be able to be incorporated into your Now platform. The integration provides you with a lot of automation, and while I think one maybe naysaying kind of argument would be that maybe automation is a nice to have and not something that's necessary, when you are dealing with the enterprise scale, automation isn't just a nice to have, it standardizes your process. It ensures quality. It makes sure that the same steps are followed every time, and it ultimately frees IT from having to keep track of those manual tasks and from that email approval, so that they can focus on things that are a little bit more closely aligned with their skill sets and maybe things that are a little bit more technologically demanding. But then ultimately, those are all, nice to have things, that we could still potentially work without. But as income streams are being disrupted, I think cost savings obviously become very, very important, right? And software asset management, according to a recent white paper that we'll send a link out, to this white paper when we do our email follow-up. But according to that white paper, software asset management can save something like 22% on IT software spend. So for anybody on this call that knows what their IT software spend number is, if you take that number and divide it by 5, it's a pretty big number, and it's a number that I would be surprised if it doesn't greatly exceed the cost of our integration. And I would honestly be surprised for most people on this call if it doesn't greatly exceed the cost of both our integration and the ServiceNow software asset management plugin. I feel like it's a level of operational maturity that, as corny as it sounds, you really can't afford not to be doing this, because the general story is that as a user, an end user, I'm going to request software from you that I need to do my job, but I'm not going to necessarily tell you when I'm done with that piece of software. So it may just sit on my system, going unused, for months or years at a time, still having a financial impact to the business, but just not being used. So with software asset management, you can analyze that software usage, and the next time that somebody requests an expensive piece of software, you can look at the usage and say, hey, you know, I've got some unused, underutilized licenses. I'm going to reclaim those and redistribute those to the new requester instead of going out to procurement and buying new licenses. It's really, I feel like it's a big area where there's a big potential for you know, financial inefficiency, and there's a lot of data to support that. So with all that overview kind of done, let's get into the how-tos. I want to make sure that you get something useful out of this and not just a sales pitch. So I want to kind of show you how the integration can actually help to support some of the things that you're working through right now, some of the challenges. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over how to automate the CMDB import with the integration. So I'm going to assume that you have installed the integration, because watching that happen is going to be like paint drying. So I'm not going to subject you to that. But once you do have the integration completed, you're just going to have to go through our guided setup, and then add some users to that software inventory policy in Jamf so that they check in with their software inventory. And then once you've got that done and you've completed the guided setup, the integration is just going to automatically import according to the schedule that you set up. So let's take a look at what that looks like over on my ServiceNow instance. So I'm going to type in ITS Jamf over here. I'm going to head right over to the guided setup. So you'll see right away that, you know, we've got a UI that looks very different from the rest of the platform. A lot of my background, like I said, is in web development. So I really like having kind of a modern UI presentation where I'm able to basically put everything that you need in one place. That's kind of the goal here. So let's just kind of really quickly walk through our basic guided setup here. We've got to configure a couple of global things, mainly around the software install tables. We need permission to be able to delete things, and we need to add a quick column for installed on device that will allow us to associate these software install records to mobile devices in the CMDB CI-COM table. So you can either make these changes manually, or you can download an update set right here and apply it through the same interface. And then the integration is going to pick up if those permissions are in place. And then we get down into connecting our Jamf instances, put in the URL of your Jamf instance. If you are hosted in the cloud, you don't need a mid server. If you're hosting on-prem, you will need to select a mid server here. And then you're going to put in the credentials for a Jamf Pro service account. It's going to need to be able to read all API endpoints, and it's going to need to be able to create and update Jamf policies and Jamf scripts. And so that is to do a couple of things. One, to orchestrate the software installation and removal, and the other to allow us to deploy our software inventory script and policy. So once you've got your credentials added in there, you can click the save button. You will see the integration go out and connect to your Jamf instance. It'll give you some progress about the deployment of the software inventory script and policy, which we can see were successful. And then it also just gives you a little API response here so that you can see that that connection was successful. Now, I'm going to go over to Jamf really quickly and just make sure to add some users to that software inventory policy scope. So just really quickly, I'm going to go into my policies. I'm going to find the Jamf software inventory policy for my instance. Head over to the scope tab. We deploy this out without any targets specified. We don't want to turn it on for everybody in your environment. We generally recommend that you turn this on for a small group. Maybe you have an internal IT test group, or maybe you just even turn it on for yourself. Just verify that the software works correctly before opening it up to everybody. And generally recommend kind of, if you do have a larger environment, maybe open it up to you know, a safe number, maybe a couple thousand at a time or so if you have a very large environment. My environment is very small. I've got like 11 or 12 computers, so I'm just going to turn it on for everybody. I'm going to go ahead and hit save there. So computers should start checking into that software inventory policy and script now, and we can move on to the next step. So we've got to map our Jamf users to ServiceNow users to make sure that basically when computers come in through the integration, they are assigned to the right person. That's going to be pretty important for your help desk supporting people, right? You want to know which computer is held by which person. And also it helps with asset management, offboarding, all your business processes, right? You want to see who is physically should be holding, your expensive assets. So we need to define a column that's going to be consistent between the user endpoints of both systems. So we've got basically all columns on the both user tables. The Jamf Pro API that we're using, this name column is going to actually be the login ID. So for our environment, this is going to work for our assignments because we have the same login IDs basically in ServiceNow and our Jamf environment. So I can click Map Users here. This is, I think, fairly common for people who maybe have an LDAP or an AD binding. Also very common for email addresses to be consistent between the two systems. You just want to pick something that you know is going to be unique and dependable. And we do have some other options available, through transform maps and different things, different more complex mapping schemes if needed. But this is going to work for my environment, so I'm going to click Next Step. Now we're just down into the scheduling of the integration. The green days are going to be the days that the integration runs. So you can just really easily toggle these on and off by clicking them. And it's going to run at the time that I specify over here. Always recommend running integrations during off business hours. It's a little harder for global companies. You've got to kind of find a time when maybe less of your users are online if you have users in every time zone. But once you've determined a good time to run it, you go ahead and click Update Schedule here, or if it's their first time, it'll say complete schedule or something like that. But that's it in terms of the basic configuration. So we can see that the integration is going to import from Jamf at 2 a.m. Monday through Friday. And now we can check out the integration dashboard. So this is where we can kick off a manual import of the integration, which we'll do right now. If it finds any new computers, we would see this count of computers increment up in real time. This is just going to be pulling computers I already have in my CMDB here. This import dashboard also just kind of contextualizes the data that's brought in by the integration, gives you a little report of each run, lets you know if there are any items requiring attention, like missing user assignments. We've got some virtual machines in our demo environment that don't have users assigned, so that makes sense. And then you can click on these big tiles up here, these big counts, to actually take a look at the records in the CMDB that were found by the integration. So I know that's what a lot of you on the call are probably interested in. So we're going to take a quick look at that. We've got the serial number, we've got model ID. The integration is not going to create models. It's just, that's a job for your procurement team. It's just going to find matching models and map them. Manufacturer is going to be populated. If you pre-create your asset records, the integration can look those up via serial number and it will appropriately map them. And it would update them. If an asset record does not exist, the baseline ServiceNow automation will create one. You could see that our user mapping was correct, and it pulled one of my developers, Eric Anderson, as the assigned to for this computer. If his record in this demo environment had a location assigned to it, then you would see his location pop up on the CI record. That lets you know kind of where geographically this asset should be. We've also got your basic configuration data down here, CPU, RAM, operating system version, disk space. We've got the disk CIs being created, network adapter CIs with MAC addresses, etc. We've got Jamf local accounts get imported, so you can see all of the local user accounts on the machine, who is if they have administrative rights, whether they have file vault enabled, You can even see if this is the last logged in user and when they last logged in. This last logged in user field is kind of cool. We've had some customers actually use that to map who the assigned to is on a CI. And what that allows them to do is basically once, so like let's say a laptop gets sent into IT for some maintenance. Once that IT support person logs into the computer and then the integration runs, then it's going to show the the help desk technician as the assigned to, which is kind of cool just in terms of tracing where where that asset is in your organization as things move around. I think that's kind of one of the cool things enabled by using that last logged in user for the assigned to. Let's go over to our computer extension attributes. The integration will pull these in. You can create ServiceNow reporting graphs from these really easily. You can use those graphs maybe if you're working through kind of some security issues to see who's in compliance or who's not. You can use those reporting graphs as kind of like a to-do list to work through different initiatives. A lot of different ways you can leverage Jamf extension attributes. They're a pretty cool feature. And then here are the software installations. So as I mentioned, that software inventory policy and script that we deploy out to Jamf allows us to make sure that this publisher is filled in. If we were just strictly pulling from the API, my knowledge of the API is that you would only have this display name and then the version column available. So this publisher would be blank. And again, that's not a slight to Jamf. It's just really, I think, down to how software is kind of enumerated via metadata, on Macs. So I'm just happy that we were able to kind of overcome it. That was a kind of an early roadblock that we worked on. And you can optionally import Jamf certificates. Not everybody really cares about these, so we don't import them by default. So really quickly, we can also look at the devices. So this is the CMDB CI-COM table. And this is where we're going to pull in the iOS and the tvOS devices. Any of the Jamf data that cleanly maps to a column on this table will land. We try not to add any columns to the CMDB. And again, because of that first step in the guided setup where we added a column to associate software to mobile devices, we can see that consistently filled in here. That's going to do some cool stuff because basically, as more and more these mobile devices are touching your network, touching your resources, it can really be potentially opening up a lot of risk for companies. I think it's as that mobile device story matures at the enterprise level, the vulnerability kind of risk profile of mobile devices is going to become more and more of a focal point as time goes on. So I'm glad that the integration is able to support that. So I mean, that pretty much wraps it up for our basic kind of CMDB import. Let's take a look at how to automate Mac software delivery. So in order to do this, we need to have basically completed the previous how-to. We need to have completed the guided setup and run that CMDB import at least once. We want to make sure that the software titles made it through specifically because the discovery models are going to be very important to the setup of the software configurations, as we'll see. So once you've completed that main guided setup and run the CMDB import, which we just demonstrated, then you're going to head over to the Jamf software portal, complete that software portal setup, and then you're going to create software configurations and catalog items with our UI wizard. The software configuration is going to be one of the inputs for the workflows that automate this whole process, and the catalog item is going to be the other one. Those two things are basically going to glue together, the install policies, the uninstall policies, the entitlements, everything that's needed to orchestrate things. So let's head back over to our demo tab. We'll type Jamf software here. Okay, now we're over to the Jamf software distribution portal. First time you visit this, it's going to require you to go through this setup screen. So you're going to click through, you're going to specify a notification group. This is basically who we should notify when more software licenses are needed. So the integration workflows are not going to deliver software for if you don't have allocations available. So basically, once you run out of those allocations, and it's not just device allocations, it could be user allocations. Obviously, it's going to depend on the license type of the entitlement. But once you you can specify the group here that should be notified that they need to buy more, basically. So we'll leave this set as procurement in our instance. And then over here, we're just going to select which policies we actually want to import from Jamf. So these are all the Jamf policy categories that we have set up in our instance. I only really care about software today, so I'm just going to keep that one checked. And then because the main CMDB import could potentially be a lot heavier than the syncing of the policies and packages from Jamf, you know, especially for some of our customers who maybe have 20,000 Macs, right? The number of that CMDB import of all those Macs is gonna take a lot longer to complete, and there may be some organizations that only want to do that on a weekly basis, once a week. But maybe you want to keep all of your policies, all that software deployment stuff up to date, you know, on a daily basis. You can configure them to be on different schedules. So now that you've got those couple of basic configurations done, we can go ahead and discover policies. So this is just going to import all of the policies from that software category from my Jamf instance into ServiceNow, and also the packages. Okay, so we've got a few of these that are already created. One of them I actually forgot to delete, which is my Photoshop one, which I want to demonstrate here today. So I'm just going to really quickly go ahead and delete this so that we can show the creation of it again. There we go. So again, this is all kind of oriented around software configurations as the starting point. So this clicking new software configuration will kick off a wizard that will walk you through everything that's needed. So I'm going to make one for Adobe Photoshop CC 2020. Pick my 2020 software model here and my entitlement. And this is going to let you know, the system keep track of how many licenses we actually have available, so that we're not getting out of compliance with our deployments. You can optionally specify a package down here. Package is not really necessary for the workflow. It's more for informational purposes. The workflows really just need to know which policies to move people into for installing and which policies to move them into for uninstalling, basically, which we'll see here. I do have to find a discovery model matching this piece of software. The integration logic is going to use that as a way to kind of verify once software is installed. And it's also going to use that to determine the display name of the app that needs to get removed in the case of an uninstall. We'll get into that a little bit more here. So we need to specify the Jamf install policy, which is called Adobe Photoshop DMG in my environment. We have a Jamf group called Adobe Photoshop users here, which is what we're going to use for the install policy scope. So the integration is just going to move somebody into that Adobe Photoshop users group in Jamf, and that's how this whole thing is going to be orchestrated. We can optionally include an uninstall policy, which is going to be leveraged, something that we can leverage for revoking software that's been deployed, or for reclaiming, you know, with the software reclamation and software asset management in ServiceNow, which we'll look at in our next demo. We do want an uninstall policy so that we can do that. If I leave auto create uninstall policy set to true, then the integration is going to deploy a kind of a Swiss Army knife generic policy out to Jamf, which has a script that basically just takes the app name as a parameter, and it can then use that app name to find the directory it's contained in, and ultimately remove it automatically from the system. So that's an option that you can use if you don't already have an uninstall policy created or an uninstall package in Jamf. I currently do have one in my environment, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick that. So I'm going to say uninstall Adobe Photoshop because I know that's my policy. And then we get over here to our catalog item. I'm going to create one for Adobe Photoshop CC 2020 for Mac. I'm going to put it in the software category here. Give it a quick description, and we'll put a little price tag on it. I think it's about 20 bucks a month or so, but I'm not the software asset manager, so at any rate, that's not important here. That was all we needed to create a software configuration and a catalog item. We get some links out to those resources. So at this point, we should have pretty much everything needed to orchestrate delivery to one of my users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to my service portal and put on that end user hat. I'm going to request something. And I'm kind of lazy, so I'm just going to search for it here, that one. So we'll go ahead and pull this up. I'm going to put this onto test 2, which I know is a computer in my environment from one of my devs. I'm going to go ahead and order now. I think this one is assigned to one of my developers, Andrea. So I'm going to go ahead and request it for her. We'll check out. And as it's submitting, it's kind of like already feeding our inputs into the workflows, and it's actually already done the basic work, which is to schedule the deployment and then move that user's computer into the policy. So at this point, the next time that Andrea checks in with her laptop, her test 2 laptop, Photoshop CC 2020 should be installed on it, which is cool. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for our second how-to. So now let's just take a look at how we can automate, I guess, the inverse of that and automate the software reclamation. So we pretty much have to have done everything that we've demonstrated so far. We need that basic guided setup, that hardware and software CMDB import to complete successfully. We need to create software configurations for any of the titles that we want to be able to reclaim. And then we need to create reclamation rules within ServiceNow for the titles that we want to reclaim based on the metering anyway. So this is how we can reclaim the underutilized software licenses. So within ServiceNow, it all kind of starts from the context of the reclamation rule. So this is going to be a minimum usage requirement that our users need to do, or they need to meet in order to justify them having this license. So I'm going to say in order for somebody to have Photoshop CC 2020 for Mac, they need to their total usage time for the last month needs to be 5 hours or more. If I select this notify user checkbox, then for anybody that doesn't meet this requirement, the integration will actually notify them and say, hey, do you still need this? If not, we're gonna pull it from your computer. If they say, yes, I do, it still requires their manager's approval. In this case, I'm just gonna skip this step. So now that we've done that basic save, setting our criteria, we need to select a product model. So I'm going to pick my Photoshop product model here. Basically, our integration ships with a scheduled job that's going to take a look at every one of these reclamation rules that you have set up, and it's going to go out to the Jamf Pro API and aggregate software usage for only these titles, because we don't want to bring a bunch of data for titles that you aren't using, you aren't actually monitoring or caring about. So that's kind of how I think the SCCM integration works as well. You only want to pull software usage for reclamation rules that you've already created. And so, so our integration is going to run, it's going to pull software usage, and then a couple days later, an out-of-box scheduled job from the software asset management product is going to run, and it's going to generate reclamation candidates. I think that's actually what the job is called. So that job is going to compare the minimum requirements to the actual software usages, and then it's going to generate a reclamation candidate for anybody that didn't meet that usage requirement. And a reclamation candidate, a removal candidate, is basically it's basically a task record that's going to get assigned, I think by default, to your software managers group. It's going to be a task called, remove Adobe Photoshop 2020. And it has a little bit of a description saying kind of which device it was installed on. It's flagged for reclamation due to low usage. Let you know who the user was, what CI the software is on, gives you a reference to that software install. It's going to try to gather any needed approvals, and then once it has them, if required, then once it gets to this awaiting revocation phase, that's when our integrations workflow will basically pick up that something needs to happen, and it will basically walk from this record over to that software uninstall policy that we established, and it will move this user Eric Anderson out of the install policy group into the uninstall policy group. And then the next time he checks in, it would then pull Photoshop from his computer. You can also kind of shortcut that process by just going up here and clicking the reclaim button. Another way that we can do this, any of the software that does get requested through our integration is going to have one of these ITS Jamf requested software records created. And oops, that's a reference. I want to click the info icon here. So I can go into this software request, and for any title that is has a status of installed, I can just click this revoke software button, and it's going to do the same thing. It's just going to kick off a method that moves them into the uninstall policy, basically. So that's kind of like the quick, super quick, I guess, run through of three of the main things that you can do with the integration in its current state. I will say that we're working to, this is our first release of the software delivery. We are listening to user feedback and looking to continue enhancing it. We're also looking to add more of this remote functionality, remote management functionality into the integration. We want you to be able to do as much of that Jamf stuff from ServiceNow as possible. We update the integration pretty regularly, try to stick to like a schedule of every month or two, adding a new release, improving the product, listening to user feedback, etc. We also make sure to stay ahead of any new ServiceNow releases. We try to certify our integrations to be compatible with those new releases before they even hit the market. I also really recommend that you check out our store page. You can just go to its.partners/Jamf. That URL will take you right to our store page, where you can see all the in-depth product features. You can see some of the reviews from our happy existing customers who we're really very grateful to them for taking the time to review the product and relate their experiences. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the webinar today. Thanks so much for joining, and have a great rest of your day.